all of the naval rules. Well, not all of them. This is a Napoleonic era after all. So there are more games than you can play in a lifetime. The three that I have are Blood, Bilge, and Iron Balls, Heart of Oak, Fighting Sail. And the beautiful part about running a naval campaign and why you should consider running a naval campaign with your friends or even solo is that it doesn't really matter what rule set you use. The scenarios that you run into, the conflicts, the battles, they're pretty basic, right? I mean, a frigate versus a frigate is whatever. So if you've got the HMS Audacious versus the Le Peuple Souverain, how did I do? Le Franklin, right? You got an 80-gun vessel versus a 72-gun vessel. Like, you could use Don't Give Up the Ship, Wooden Ships and Iron Men, and then any one of these three. There's probably a whole bunch of others, but those are the two that come to mind. You could bounce from one to the other. If we wind up with a scenario that pits 3 or 4 vessels against 2 or 3 vessels, I would go with Fighting Sail. If I have a couple of smaller ships, this rule set is really good for the larger ships. Kind of breaks down at the sloop corvette level. I think this would work great for that. By the way, this is not yard work today. I know my hands are jacked up. I was not being careful while I was sharpening my swimming knife. We were snorkeling down in the bay, and I always carry a knife in case I encounter sea life in distress and need to cut away the nets, the fishing line that they get wrapped up in. Never the sea turtles, by the way. That would be a federal offense, and I would never admit to touching one of those. But you feel bad. So you strap a knife to your leg, and then I was sharpening it today as I got out of the water, and whoops. Anyway, that's these are the kind of problems you want to have, right? Oh, geez, I was snorkeling, I cut myself. Anyway. As you will recall, in our last episode, we found that the British have not been having much luck in their blockade of Mauritius. And for those of you that click on things without reading them, we're talking about the Mauritius campaign. And this is, let me find what it looked like. Here we go. This is October 1809. And to set the stage for today's video, let's just take a little look-see. We'll get the white balance right so you can actually read it. And in October of 1809, the Caroline, that's a French vessel, came whipping through and bumped into the British vessel, the Leopard. Now, the Caroline had a prize with her, and the Leopard was going after that prize. The Caroline, much smaller vessel, had the advantage of speed and was able to kind of cut in and distract the Leopard, and that let the prize get away. The Leopard, suffering some damage, they had to veer off from it, effect some repairs. They put on all possible sail. They flew their pocket chiefs. I know you know that reference. That makes us best friends. And caught the wind, but unfortunately, with the damage, they lost a spar. It not bad, right? Not enough to put them out of action permanently, but it did mean that they weren't able to catch up with the prize, and both the prize and the HMS Venus were able to make it back into, well, Grandport. Yeah, I think they made it into Grandport. So this is one of the things we got to be aware of, is that in the real world, a very similar situation happened, that the Caroline actually wound up sailing down here to La Réunion and settling in. And this little notch right here is a place called St. Paul. That's where they settled in, and that's the big raid, the big Mauritius raid, where they took over the joint. That's not going to happen to us. Right, so this is, and then also, by the way, that was the Caroline. The Venus came in. I think it was pointing. So that's the Caroline. The Venus came in more from the north. They opted to take a more westerly route and come down north from the north, and they got to right about here. And wouldn't you know it, they were very close to where that battle was. Now, I didn't realize it at the time that the battle was being fought, but that battle was being fought here on the 8th and 9th, and when you get to within 16 millimeters of this island here, the ships can start to communicate with the island via semaphore. So the Venus comes in on the 8th, 9th, here they are on the 9th, and then on the 10th, they get to right here. They could probably even hear the sound of the cannon fire rolling across the ocean, and they go, whoops, I'm going to settle into Port Louis. Actually, I said, you know what? I decided, why don't we go ahead and have them settle into St. Paul? So, because here's what we're doing. We're using the historical events to inform our little campaign. I'm kind of steering things in the direction of the historical campaign. In late November, bear in mind, in the real world, in our history, the Caroline came back in August. They had a little trouble. Their prize was damaged. It was a fat old lady slow rolling across the ocean, so they were delayed getting in. In the real world, that raid on St. Paul, in which the British had such great success, we talked about that in one of the early videos, that took place in, I think, September. Now, we are in October. Things are going a little slower, but I still want to recreate that raid. So I had the Venus now veer off with her prize and park herself in St. Paul. And so that means as we turn the page, literally, from October to November, the situation looks a little bit something like this. There is a convoy returning at some point in November. We're going to dice off for when that happens. It consists of the Minerva. And the Minerva is a... What is the Minerva? She is a... Where are you, Minerva? Come on out. All right, I'll look her up here in a minute. She's got the HMS Victor. I wrote down Victory, and I'm like, that's a 100-gun vessel. Come on, it's the most famous vessel in the... But this little side note, this little side hustle that the Brits have going, they are not tasking the Victory on that. It's the HMS Victor. In the real world, the Victor was captured up in Bombay, rechristened the Revenant, and that's where we are right now. And then, of course, the Minerva also has 2 Indiamen. Very successful raiding for the Minerva. So we have 2 vessels, a fairly substantial one. And I wish I could find my notes. Where'd you go, Minerva? Oh, I know where it is. See, so I've been struggling because I made up these notes. These are my historical notes, and I kept looking at them and going, wait a minute. How do I reconcile what I wrote here with what happened in my campaign? And then I realized, oh, I got to write a big fat reminder to myself. This is what genuinely happened. The Venus, Marche, Bellon, in late 1809, and I couldn't find exactly one, right? And so these 3 Indiamen, one of them was retaken by the Magicienne. Didn't happen for us. The HMS Magicienne. So where are we at here? So the HMS Leopard showed up in this case, showed up in early 1810, and ours, it showed up in 1809. Whatever, that's fine. So this is where I kept getting a little confused, right? So here's the Venus, the Caroline returns in August. This is what really happened. The Venus Marche Creole, but I have the Minerva showing up. The Bellone returns in November 1809. Now in our campaign, things are a little bit different because this is where we're at here. The Venus, as I said, arrived in Port Louis, and then in November, arrives in Port Louis, and then she moves to St. Paul in November, so that we can have that little raid. Instead of capturing the Caroline, we're going to see if the British can recapture the Venus. Aha, which means it's not the Minerva. I don't know why I wrote Minerva down there. I'm going to figure it out here about halfway through this video. This is actually the Marche. And the Marche, I have notes on. See, this was my starting roster, is a 40-gun frigate. So we have a couple of questions we have to determine here. First of all, where is the Marche coming on the map? We've got, now the Bombay is up in that direction, so I'm going to roll a D6. And then the other question is, what's the prevailing wind? See, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 for northeast, northwest, northeast, and east. Let me grab my dice. There we go. So we'll bring those down. So I got to roll 2 D6 to find out what happens. And the first we'll determine is where they coming on from the 5. So she's coming in right here. So the Marche is coming on right here on what day? I'm going to roll a D10 for the day of the month. On the 2nd. Okay, good. So 11-2. Now, also bear in mind, the Raisonnable, the Nereid, the Sirius, and the Boetica, that's the ships that the British have. So the British have, well, first of all, let's figure out what the prevailing wind is. It is a 3. So the prevailing wind is going to be coming out of the north, due north, once again. So pretty consistent winds here. But the other question is, what about the British ships? Well, the Leopard is in for repairs. He's over in Rodriguez. You remember the Leopard took a beating from a smaller vessel, kind of red-faced probably, but hey, they did the best they could. Good. We'll give them a solid B for effort. With the Caroline in Grandport, or as it was known at the time, Mahaburg, we're going to stick the Boetica. They are on station right here. They are prowling. And the problem is the British don't have enough ships to blockade every single port, but they want to keep an eye on the Caroline. They want to be able to grab her when she comes out. We're going to stick the Sirius on station here at St. Paul, and they're kind of cruising around here. Keep an eye on San Denis. I know that looks like a P. It's not. It's a D. This is a copy of a copy, so it looks a little weird. It's San Denis. And that's because, as I said, the Venus, the Orient, and the Ceylon, they have come in here. The Orient got captured. I don't think that's the Orient that you're thinking of. It might be the Orient that blew up big time, put on a rather impressive show at the Battle of the Nile. But I'd have to double check on that. She's badly... That seems weird to me. Is that what we said? I don't know. We'll figure that out later. The point is, for today, for November, we've got the Sirius and the Boeotia. So as the Marsh comes on and sails in, see this dotted line here? That's the visibility range. So the Marsh has no idea what all's going on. She's been up on station for months and months. So she comes sailing through, probably thinking that Rodriguez was taking long enough to go. So she's probably going to give them a little bit of a wide berth, thinking that she's going to come into the safest harbor around. And when she gets to right about here, she's going to get word, hey, don't go to here. And this is the way they operated. They said, come in roughly between these two ports so that we can tell you which one is the danger zone. So they're going to get a signal from the top of the mountain saying, hey, steer for Port Louis, not Mahabharb. In order to get there, they're going to have to wheel through all of these. So what I got here is the Raisonnable is going to take this track, just kind of patrolling. And then the Nereid, these are the only two ships that they have available for prowling the ocean. And they've mostly been ordered to stay out of sight of the land, okay? This is where you're most likely to encounter one of the French vessels. We already have a couple of ports bottled up. You know, the Marsh may be directed to Saint Denis, okay? But now the reason I haven't gone to the next step, I have to shut the camera off. I've got some math to do. Because I got to figure out, so now we know that wind is out of the north, and that's why these are all kind of diagonal lines, because the vessels can't sail directly into the wind. Whenever they're moving more north, they're going to be sailing shorter increments. They sail, because they have to tack, and they're not going to do a whole lot of tacking back and forth. This one might be a little too sharp. This may need to come more like this because they can only sail within I think it's 30 degrees of the wind. So very slow going, and then they'll be able to whip back down here. And likewise, the Nereid here, every time they're moving more north, they're going to be moving at a slower rate, which may be okay, right? Because as you're moving at a slower rate, they're going to spend more time in this capture zone where they're more likely to intercept La Marche. And as I've said before, you want to establish what your patrol lanes are first so that, and as I've said before, you establish your patrol lanes first, you let the dice decide when the Marche comes on board, and then you just see where the lines intersect. I got to be honest with you, I got a little excited. I saw that after 2 days of sailing, which one is this? This is the Nereid would be right here. And after 2 days of sailing, the Marsh would be here, except remember we rolled and the Marche comes on board on the 2nd, which means at the end of the 3rd, they'd be here. Here's where they are on the 4th. So at the first opportunity for the Marche to be intercepted, unfortunately, the two vessels that might have intercepted them are over here in the case of the Raisonnable, and over, 1, 2, 3, and way up north over here for the Nereid. So then on the 4th and on the 5th, they're going to be basically in the safety zone. The Boeotia is somewhere in here. There may be a chance. I'll be honest with you. When I looked at this, if they had come on the 1st, it still wouldn't have mattered, right? If I just said, okay, well, I guess they're here on the 1st, 2nd, what's the word I'm looking for here? The fidelity, the resolution is such that you do have a little bit of discretion to force battles to happen. Remember that these vessels, they're all frigates, they move 30 millimeters upwind. And so I took a little discretion here. I said, I'm just going to go ahead and, so that's about 30 moving upwind. And then I used the 58 millimeters downwind, and that's how I tracked the the path of the raisonnable. It's a little bit fuzzy, right? There'd be a little bit north, a little bit south, and because of that fuzziness on the margins, you can kind of nudge things to make the scenario happen so that you actually generate tables. This is what we do when we play in Bronsteins over on D&D. Over on the D&D tables, we say, look, the whole point of this is conflict. And so if you guys have independent orders and you're operating under the fog of war, one of the things that the referee should do is steer things in the direction of conflict. If there's a chance that we can see some action, make the action happen. But in this case, given that 1 centimeter is 50 kilometers, there's no possible way to nudge things there. So here we are on the 4th, and where's the other on the 4th? See, this is separated by like 350 kilometers. What is that in real units? 180, 210 miles? You can't nudge these boats 210 miles. And that's okay, because all we did this episode is we said in early November, this is the first 2 weeks of November, the patrol didn't work, so now the British commanders are getting a little antsy. And now we can say, okay, this little setup here, the Marsh, the Victor, they're going to go into Grandport. And now we can do a little land battle. Now we can say, hey, what if we put so we get a couple of different things. We can say, what if we have our land invasion? We're going to go ahead and make a raid on St. Paul. We're going to try to capture either the Ceylon, the Orient, or the Venus. Maybe catch some prizes. And we'll explain how to do that. And we're going to use a different rule set for that raid on St. Paul. And we're going to fit the scenario to my collection of miniatures and to my rule set collections. You could very easily run a kind of, here, let me go grab a book. Okay, I lied. I grabbed 3 books. You could easily run a Fistful of Lead. Just do a little sneak and peek, right? 5v5. You've got 5 guys patrolling as a scenario, as a solo scenario. That would be really easy. You've got 5 guys trying to take out those sentries. The more sentries they take out, the more successful the raid is. You build a little scenario and you extrapolate broadly, and what happens? Song of Blades and Heroes would be another great one. Maybe not this as written. Let's get the glare out of here. Maybe not this one as written because it's really designed for larger battles, but you use this, you inform it, you use this informed by this, and we can spend a little time, little thought, come up with a scenario. Hey, how successful is the raid? And I think that's what we'll talk about in our next episode. Today, we're just focusing on the naval battles and why did those ships not run into each other. The other thing you can do is maybe flip the script. Maybe now the French, because they can come in and out of port basically at whim, unless we stick the Nereid and the Raisonnable, but they have nobody else, right? Maybe the Leopard. But they got a couple of ships here that they can perhaps intercept the British invasion fleet or the raiding fleet as they sail over here. That's another thing that you could do. And I'm not sure which one I'm going to do. I will find out next week. Tune in and we'll go over what the next phase of our campaign is somewhere in November 1809. However, I'll say this. I think for right now, what we've been doing largely mimics the historic results. We have some little differences around the margins. It's a couple of different vessels in St. Paul for the raid than historically appeared, but the French have had a very successful raiding season. Now I have a much greater appreciation for why the French were able to bring all their prizes down here and why this was such a thorn in the side of the British crown. So let's make it less of a thorn. Let's flip the script the other way around and do a little raid on St. Paul. In our next episode, we'll talk about how to set that up, what rules we're going to use. It may just surprise you. Until then, it won't surprise you to learn that I'm praying for you.